guys, welcome back, and today I want to show you how to make this amulet. It's reversible and a lot of fun to create. So these are the materials and let's get started. So first up we're going to measure the stone. So mine is about 25 millimeters. That's important because we need to know this to create the open section to show the stone. So I'm cutting a piece of around 70 to 80 centimeters of wire and leaving a length of about 20 centimeters on one side. This is going to be used for the tail later on, so quite important to have that. I'll get to that section later on, but for now just leave a tail. So what we're doing here is use an object to create the center, which obviously needs to be smaller than your stone. So mine is around 20 millimeters and my stone is 25 millimeters, so it sits on top beautifully. So next it's quite important to coil the wire around this section as neatly and as round as possible. The reason being for that is obviously the more neat the coil is to start with, the neater the whole design is at the end. So this is a very important part, and really just take your time with it. When I did mine, I opened mine several times because I wasn't happy with it, so it doesn't take too long. So you can undo this many times if you want. So you can see me here, I'm taking it quite slowly, and I really just want to make sure that the coil is as neat as possible. Now you see me here doing this by hand, but what I found actually is easier and helpful is when you place the coil on a really hard surface, on a table or something like that, and then you kind of feed the wire around the coil, which gives it a much neater design. You press your thumb, each time you bend, you press your thumb on the wires or squeeze them together to make sure that they are as close together as possible, and that way your coil will undo and it will spring open when you let go, which is entirely normal. But the neater the coil is, the better your weave will sit, and the weave is what will ensure the coils to be neat and tight in the end. So once we've done that, we're going to bring in our weaving wire, and we are now creating the first of the rays. Now it's really fiddly in the beginning and you really won't be able to see the weave properly. So what I've done here, I want to show you what it looks like in the starting stages, just so you get an idea. But I will show you the weave in a close-up with straight wires, just to show you the actual technique. But I want to show you how it actually looks when you're starting out first. You can see how uneven the actual coil is, and this is entirely normal. So when you see it like that, don't get discouraged and chuck it out the window, because your weave will straighten out the coil, and it will all look neat and tidy once you're done with it. So don't give up when you see it looking like that, because it will straighten out. So you can see me here weaving through the actual coils itself. You can't, obviously it's not weaving, it's more threading really, and that is really what takes so long. It's a lot more difficult in the beginning stages because obviously you've got a much longer wire to weave with, and it's very, very loose at this stage. So but as you get further along into the design, it becomes much easier. Now you can use separate wire pieces if you want to. I did that as well because it's just so much quicker to weave with, and it's also a lot easier. So you can take the weaving wire and cut it into pieces to create the rays. I've done it in 3 instances, so I think it was about 1.5 meters of your weaving wire, and you can cut that into sections and add in the wire. I'll show you how to do that at a later stage. For now, this is just how to do the weave, and this is what it looks like so far. And as you can see, the circles are really completely uneven, and it doesn't look anything like the end result. So when you see that, don't give up, that's normal. So once we've done that, we're going to tidy up the weave. I'll show you that again once we get to the next stage. So this is just threading and making sure that the wire doesn't kink, because that's a high probability with this fine wire. And you'll watch me put my thumb and guide the wire through so that it prevents the wire from kinking and bending and creating those really irritating little knobs that you get sometimes when you're working with really fine wire. So that's what it looks like, and I will show you in a minute how to create the actual weave. And I'm going to show you this with straight base wire simply because it'll be so much easier to show you the pattern. So this is what it looks like. You can already tell how much more constraint there is to the actual spiral, and it only get better with each weave that we're going to be adding. As I said, don't stress if it's not entirely straight, it will get much better as you continue. So we're going to start by wrapping around 3 times around the base wire. Then we're going to wrap around wire 1 and 2 once, come in between wire 1 and 2, and we are going to go around wire 2 and 3 once. Bring the wire in, and you can see how I'm holding my finger over the wire at the back. This helps me to create the weave much better. So bring the wire in between 2 and 3 and wrap it once around wire 3. Bring it back in between wire 1 and 2 and step it up to wire 4 before wrapping it around once wire 4. Once again, coming back down from behind, wrapping it around wire in between wire 1 and 2, and this time coming all the way up to the top before coming back on the other side. Now this is a mirror image. What we are doing is repeating what we've done on the left, except that on the right obviously we need to create a little circle detail first before we create the rest of the weave. So it's around the base wire once first before coming back in between wire 1 and 2 and so forth. So you're just repeating what you've done in essence on the other side, except mirrored. Now obviously I've only used 5 base wires here. The amount of wires that you have in your design just depends on the size of the spirals you have created. You know, I've had 6 in mine. Obviously the more spirals you have, the more of the weave you're going to create, so it's entirely dependent on the design that you've made. So once you've done the weave, it can always look as if it's not straight and tidy because of the sort of nature of the weave makes the wires cross. Once you flatten it out like that, it all looks neat and tidy, as you can see here. So that's what it looks like, and you can already see how much neater it looks with all the rays in place. So now to add in more wire, all you do here is take a new piece of wire and anchor it somewhere near where you need the new wire to be at the top. And I recommend to start adding in at the bottom where we do the 3 wraps around the base wire, just because that is the least inconspicuous place, because obviously we've got quite wide surfaces to weave at the top when we go, you know, and do the rays. So it's best to do it at the bottom so you can't really see it there. One little tip that I would like to give you is use a T-pin. If you find it difficult to thread the wire through, there will be occasions where the wire just won't go through because the base wires are so close together. I then use a T-pin to help me open up the gap a little bit, and that doesn't really do any damage to the design at all. It just opens up the gap a little bit. So there we go. So once we're done, so obviously there's 2 parts. We have a front weave and a back weave times 2, because we are sandwiching the stone obviously. So when you're cutting the wires, always cut the wires on the section that is going to be on the inside, so that the wires won't hook. So that's what it looks like. So the next step is to actually create the coil. Okay, so there's 2 ways of doing it. I have used a formula to work out the exact size of the coil, and it works in such a way that you take the diameter of the spiral, or the diameter of the hole we need to fill, okay, which in our case was 20 millimeters. And then you need to kind of approximately estimate the amount of coils you will need to fill it, which is easily done by working out the diameter of the wire and laying them side by side so you get a rough idea. Now my coil needs to have about 6, so then what we need to do is multiply the diameter by half of pi, and then that figure gets multiplied by the number of coils starting from the center. So that's what it will look like. So we're going to, or else you can just guesstimate. Obviously this is just a guess. My wire was a little bit too short. It was only about 13 centimeters. So it didn't quite fill the gap. So if you started off with a 20 centimeter tail, if you cut it down to 18, you will be all right. That is with a 25 centimeter stone and a 25 millimeters and a 20 millimeter hole. Hope that all makes sense. All right, so we are now creating a coil, and if you wanted to have an extra fine sort of tip to the inside coil, what I do here, I don't know if you can really see that properly, is I pinch the wire ending really hard, and what that does, it kind of thins out the material, and it creates a little point at the end, which makes it fine. So you kind of squeeze it really hard as you rotate, and that gives you a very fine looking tip. And then I am just coming in with a pair of pliers, and I'm squeezing this little coil even tighter, get it to be as tightly as possible so that the wire we just measured out fits around the coil perfectly. And then once you've done that, we are just going to start to coil this wire around itself. So I quite like making coils. It's really meditative for me. I really enjoy it, and I also think they look quite nice. So, and this is where your bent nose pliers come in really handy. You can see here why that is, because when you're coiling otherwise the nose of the pliers would get in the way, but here, because it's bent up, it's super easy to create. So bent nose pliers for that alone are one of my favorite tools to use. They're so handy. If you don't have any, I really recommend buying a pair, because I use them all the time. So what we're doing here is very gently grab where the last section of the coil was made. So, and we're rolling it back in. I don't know if you remember, back in my day when I was a little girl, we used to have those little French knitting dolls. I can't remember what they're called, and they used to create a little sausage that we then used to roll into coasters, and that reminds me of that. So it's basically the same principle, and you then just roll this in. You can see how my coil is slightly too small. That's because my wire was a bit too short when I started off with. So I preempted that for your design, so hopefully your coil will fit perfectly. When you get towards the end and the center, it gets a little bit more tricky to coil, because obviously there is a structure in the way. And you just need to take your time and then just kind of roll in the last section really slowly and then set it into place. So once the coil is coiled, you need to arrange it in such a way that it looks central. As I said, mine's a little bit too small because I didn't have enough wire, so there's an open section, but yours, if you've used the correct wire lengths, will fill out the whole 100%. And I just arrange it here to make sure that it looks central, like so. Takes a little bit of fiddling, and that's what it looks like so far. Now it may be still a little bit skew, and what I do here is I take the piece that I've just created and make sure that it is face down with the outside bit facing outwards, because we're hammering on the inside, so any sort of unevenness from the hammering will be hidden inside. And what this does, it flattens not only the weave, but it also flattens the design and the coil, and it gives it all around more strength. If you hammer wire, it work hardens it, and it will instantly make it a little bit less floppy, especially for my coil, because it's obviously not fitting in 100%. So that's what it looks like. You can see how straight it looks. So we are obviously creating another half. The other half will not have a coil in the middle, because obviously that's where the stone is showing, and we are going to lay these on top of each other. So I've taken my 0.6, or you can even use a 0.8 if you're using seed beads. I just had to use a 0.6 because the micro facets have got a tiny hole and they need to fit onto it. So I had to use a 0.6, and I threaded on all of the macro facets onto that wire, what we're going to do is use that wire to stitch the two halves together. It's going to be the central wire, so we're going to lay these two halves on top. So that's what it looks like with the stone. It won't stay in place to start with because there's no structure. So what we're going to do is take the wire with all of the beads, and we're going to be attaching it to the two halves. First we're going to start by taking our kind of threading weaving wire, and we are going to go near the center. Just make sure that where the coils finish, those two sections line up perfectly. So you want the two top lines to the two top wires to line up perfectly. That is where we're going to create the bail later. So weave through the two top rows of the coil and just kind of wind the weaving wire around those once or twice, and that's the starting point. And next we're going to bring in the 0.6 wire. What we need to do now is thread in a bead, and that is going to be our starting point. It's a little bit fiddly here, I'm trying to feed it through, but there we go. And then we take the weaving wire and we go underneath, and it's really important to come in from underneath and go around it, because that way the wire is hidden the most. If you wrap the weaving wire starting from the outside, it creates a little bit of a bulk. So if you come in from underneath, wrap it around, and then go back out the other side, it's much tighter. I hope it makes sense. You'll probably see that for yourself. And all we're going to do is go through the frame with each bead that is attached, and we're going to repeat the process. So once you've gone through the frame, bring in a new bead, and we are going to wrap the weaving wire around the base wire once again. So just once, as closely as possible to the bead, like so. Push the weave in together as closely to the bead as possible. Go through the frame again, and we do this after each bead, and this will make sure that not only to keep the frame together, but the whole weaving will look a lot tidier if you do this with each time. Obviously you could do this with every second or third, but it just wouldn't look as neat and tidy. So it's worth the extra effort to stitch it on like that, because it looks much better. So that's what it looks like, and we're going to go all the way around until we get back to the other side. And you can see here I'm using the T-pin. Obviously if you're using the 0.4 or the 0.5, again, it's really difficult sometimes to get it through, and that will help you open up the gap and get the wire through so much easier. And I've used it throughout the whole design when weaving. It's really helpful to have that. So then we just continue. So wrap around the base wire once, make sure it's close to the bead, and that way it will look really neat and tidy. So go through the frame, both sides. And what I find really helpful is if I pull up the base wire and kind of push the beads together in such a way that the weaving wire gets pushed together. I hope that makes sense again. But yeah, you see what I'm doing here, and we'll go all the way around. So kind of a third of the way the stone will now be able to be put in place. It gets more difficult to feed it in later on, so put it in at this stage. It will still be quite loose. Obviously it'll be, you know, set in place once you carry on. So we're just going to continue now and until we get to the end. So that's what it looks like, and what we need to do now is secure both the base wires of where the stones sit onto and the weaving wire. So we are just going to go and wrap it and you know, do away with it as neatly and tidy as possible. I'm wrapping it around the base wires so that it's hidden. So just pull it tight, and then obviously later on I just trim it off, and I secure all the wires in such a way they can't come undone, so that you don't lose all of your hard work just because the wires weren't secured properly, which is something that I've done before. Yep, happened to me plenty of times. And then what we're going to do is there's obviously two base wires at the top, the thick wires that we've used to create the coils. We only need one. So the front of the wire is just in the front of the one wire is just being coiled into a little sort of detail. You can I wouldn't recommend just cutting it off because the weaves could slip out, so that's why I made a little coil, and the rest of the wires just get wrapped around to keep it in place. And that's what it looks like so far. So kind of just arrange it, and it's a little bit fiddly again at this stage, but I think you've done all of the hard work, so this works. So what we need to do next is decide what we're going to do with the inside wire, where we, the one that has the stone showing. Obviously we can't create a coil, so we need to do something with it. As I said, I'm not too keen on just cutting it off because, the weaving wire could just come out. So what I decided to do is create a little loop like so, and this was used to then attach a little charm, which in my case were just some more of the turquoise beads, but obviously since this is an amulet, it could have anything. You could add a little sort of luck charm, or a little finding a little butterfly or whatever you want to that little section here. So I thought to have that loop at the front of the stone, it's actually quite cute, so I decided to put that there. So just trim it off and just make sure it's as round as possible, which is easier said than done when you have a thicker gauge like that. I'm using my Tronics cutters here to kind of shape and shave the end of the wire again to create a finer tip, which will then enable me to squeeze it down and kind of have the ends meet, which again is helpful when you're wearing it later because it won't snag on your clothing, which happens so often with designs. And I'm going to do the same with the little top loop, so just trim it off. So the next step is to create the bell at the top, which is super easy. All it is a sort of rosary link at the top. So what we need to create first is a little straight section to create the loop. So I'm just bending it at the 90-degree angle, just making sure you leave enough space on the stem, so to speak, for about 3 wraps or so. So I'm creating a 90-degree angle, and then I'm going to bring in my round nose pliers to create the loop at the top. So here it is. So all I'm going to do is take the wire, grab the wire roughly where the angle is, and decide what size you want this to be. So go around from behind the loop and create, it almost looks like a lollipop. I always call this the lollipop stage because that's what it looks like so far. So straighten out the wire and just make sure that the loop is as round as possible, because obviously it's a prominent feature in your design, so you want it to look nice and tidy. And then I am just going, again, my bent nose pliers. You can see here how invaluable they are for me anyway, because obviously as you're wrapping the wire, instead of the nose being in the way, they bend out of the way, and you can then very easily wrap the wires around the stem without getting snagged. So once again, recommend getting those. You can then kind of squeeze to control the neatness of the wrap before you then continue to do the last section. Having a look at the back, and I'm just continuing to twist, and it gets a little bit more tricky when you get to the base because obviously the beads are in the way. So just continue wrapping until you go back all the way to the back of the design, or well, obviously this one is reversible, but you want it to be as neat and tidy as possible. So I tend to have all of the cut wires, if I can, on the same side of the design. So that's what it looks like, and all that's left to do is cut the wires. So we're going to trim this off. Before we do that, I am going to create a little loop again, because obviously we want to attach a charm. Now you could just trim this off, or you could do what I'm doing here and creating a little loop once again to attach your charms to. So it's the same process as with all the other loops we've created. We just make sure that the loop is touching so that the charms can't actually fall off once you've added them, and then that's it. Super easy to do, and that both that kills two birds with one stone. So whereas we are getting rid of the wire, and we're also creating a little attachment for the charm. Super easy. So the last thing to do is just to create a little rosary link with your charms, and that's it. Obviously you can attach whatever you like to it. I've just used another one of the turquoise beads because I thought it looks cute. So, and that's that. So thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this. Don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials. If you want to see what I get up to, otherwise pop by on my Facebook, Instagram or TikTok under imbalicrafts. For those of you that need help or have any questions, we have a fantastic little group going which is called Wirewrap and Jewelry Artists Worldwide. We always have some fun challenges going, and it's a fantastic little group full of amazing artists, so come and join us. Lastly, if you need any square or half round wire, visit my website and see what I've got available. See you soon.